Hello, everyone. It's me, Andrew. Hopefully, you all are doing well out there today. Oof, today, y'all, a very frustrating day. I have a low level migraine, maybe just a headache, stress headache. Um, but we're here now, so let's see who's watching. I see a couple of you are tuning in. If you would be so kind to like and share this post, that would be super kind of you. We really appreciate it. It really does help and it gets boosts the signal and gets the word out about what we're doing and the things that we do. Let's see. Marianne's watching. Hey, Marianne. Harry's watching. Hi, Harry. Norma's watching. Hey, Norma. Let's see who else is watching. My neighbor, Susie's watching. Hey there. Busy day, not necessarily in a great way. If you are friends with me on my personal account, you may have seen some of the recent drama that I've been going through. I don't want to get too much into it because I've been trying not to think about it, but it's hard not to think about it. But at the beginning of this month, I had gotten a ding on my credit report, and I was kind of curious what that was because I've been working really hard over the past couple of years to rebuild my credit. And so I went and checked it out, and I saw that a previously closed student loan account had reopened magically after having been closed for over 4 years. So it was super frustrating to kind of see this. And so the past today, all of today and yesterday, I've been on the phone trying to get this sorted out. It's super frustrating, especially considering that for 4 years it was not it was not even open and to be paid on. So the fact that I had not made payments for the past 4 years on something that I couldn't make payments on, they have retroactively charged interest and penalties. So what started off as a $2,500 loan 20 years ago has ballooned up over almost 9,000. So it's very, it's kind of one of those things where, you know, we're just trying to settle into this new way of living. And, with the store closed, we're kind of navigating, kind of starting over and starting from scratch, even though we're not really starting from scratch because we have all of you out there. It's just something that was unexpected and I had thought had been dealt with and done. Um, and yeah, so anyways, that was how my day was. Very frustrating. Hopefully you all had a much better day than I did. And yeah, so I'm currently dealing with it. It's kind of a headache. I have a headache. It's just one of those things. Um, Hopefully you all are not dealing with the same kind of malarkey that I am. Harry says, eating homemade pizza right now. That sounds good. Michelle's watching. Hey, Michelle. Donna's watching. Hey, Donna. They're talking about that yummy pizza. Donna says, ugh, not good, Andrew. I agree. Definitely not good. It's made me super stressed out the past couple days. Julie's watching. Hey, Julie. Michelle says, been relaxing with my hubby while he has been playing his video game. Oh, good. That sounds nice. We've been working. William right now, he is at the cottage with Jen. They're filming the next Saturday morning tutorial. and they're working on that right now. It's supposed to be a little bit of a longer one, so they started a little bit earlier in the day and have been working on that while I've been dealing with the nightmare time. Um, and so I started breaking out like crazy, super stressed. I was like, all those years of having acne, I understand now why. It's all that stress and not that easy living. Anyway, um so if you didn't see last night, we had a gemstone sale. It was a really fun one. I hope you all enjoyed that. There was a lot of really lovely things available. A lot of things are still available. And then last week and like the week before, um, interspersed with the move and all that, we had focused on seed beads. I still haven't tracked down the size 6 seed beads, but I wanted to give you an update on the project that I had been working on. Um, and I thought I would show you some of the ways that I work on that. So that's what we're going to do today. I was going to do something else, but the day kind of got away with me being on hold for forever and eternity. Let's see. Harry says, I worked on my kit project, drilled wood, and added wires, and planned how to go forward. Oh, good. That sounds productive. Donna says, worked on pieces for my big show in April. Well, good luck. Hopefully, it is super successful. Where is your show in April? Let us know. And hopefully, if anybody is near you, they can stop by and hang out and show support. Marion says, I have laundry day tomorrow. Now one load or 4. Oh boy, that sounds like a big project. As Harry mentioned, he worked on his kit project. We are having our Meet Your Creative Community coming up on March 22nd. And basically, it's a time where folks can share what they made using a kit from Allegory Gallery. If you aren't familiar with us, let's see, put that on the top there. I was like, why does this look different? Well, that's why the overlay disappeared. If you, well, I don't know if you'll get anything if you order it now. Probably not, maybe. William and Barb have been focusing on orders that have kits in them just to make sure to get them out and get them in the hands of people before the Meet Your Creative Community Day on March 22nd. But at this point, I don't know. You still may be able to get stuff in unless you're far. If you're an international order, then probably you won't. But hopefully, folks enjoy this as a way to get to know their fellow makers in the hashtag AG Bead fam. We have almost 9,000 people on Facebook and 1,000 in our group, the Allegory Gallery Design Challenge group. And then there's like 1,000 on Instagram. And then I have like 3,000 on Instagram. And we have a lot of folks who are in the orbit of Allegory Gallery, but we don't know everybody, you know? So we thought of, we had talked about some of the kits from yonder years ago and how nice it was to have those kit reveal days because folks really, they showed up and they showed the things they made. And it was one of those things that I think is so fascinating when you see what folks do with like the same ingredients, but then use their own creativity to make something unique. And it's also interesting to see where there's like crossovers. Because like we had one challenge where there was a lot of bead weaving and the folks who were all bead weavers kind of got together and kind of hung out and made stuff and got to know each other that way. So it's one of those things where it's a nice way to get familiar with folks. We have a couple of folks in our group, the Allegory Gallery Design Challenge group, where folks chat and are frequent sharers. But we also have a lot of people who don't post anything. And we're hoping that this will like kind of jumpstart the conversation and act as an icebreaker for our community so that more people can participate and, feel engaged and active. And I think it's fun to get to know the people in your group. So, anyways, Michelle said, good luck on your show. Donna says, it is at Petals from the Past Antiques in the Garden in Jameson, Alabama, Friday, April 19th from 9 to 5, and April 20th from 9 to 3. So if anybody is near Jameson, Alabama, stop by and see Donna and her creations. And then she said that she has another one next Saturday from 11 to 6 with my local metaphysical shop. Well, good luck. Sounds like you're going to be busy, busy, busy. It's super busy for me as well. If you are local, there's a show up in Thornton, PA at the Manos Gallery where I have 5 different pieces on view right now. I hope folks buy them, so they asked me to come back. This is a part of the Acre show that they're doing. So there's artists from Johnstown and Westmoreland County and New Kensington and Wheeling, West Virginia. So all around this kind of part of southwestern Pennsylvania and a little into West Virginia. Different creative makers are showing their work. So there's sculpture, there's photography, there's painting, there's collage, there's a musician, there's writers, ceramicists, all kinds of goodies. So definitely check that out if you are around. If you are not, they did post a lot of the work on their Facebook page. So check them out, the Manos Gallery in Tarentum, PA. So that is currently on view, and you can see some of my work there. I've got some really kind of cute, small collages, very affordably priced. And I'm also in a show that opened a couple of days ago in Cookeville, Tennessee. If you're anywhere near there, check out the Silver Fern Gallery. I'm in a show called Transformations with the Queer Metalsmiths, and there's a really lovely show. If you can't make it in person, if you go to their Instagram page, you can check out the show virtually that way. William and I had talked about going down, but with everything with the move and now, the issue that I talked about in the beginning of this video, which I just found out about. So that really didn't, it didn't really affect that decision. But anyway, so everything with the move, we decided it would be best to stay close to home for the moment. As we continue to unpack and reorganize and work on the new space and get those kits out to everybody who ordered them and, just kind of get back on top of things. So there's that. And then if you're in England, there's a show opening this weekend in Hereford, UK, called the Ferris Festival. And I'm going to be showing with the Society of Inclusive Blacksmiths as one of their siblings, because it's SIB is their acronym, Society of Inclusive Blacksmiths, which I thought was pretty cute. So I'm going to be showing in England. So if you're anywhere near there, definitely check that out. That opens this weekend. I post the information on my personal timeline. So if you are nearby and you want to check that out, please do. I don't know yet if they are having any kind of virtual way of seeing the show. Obviously, I'm not going to be going over for the opening. I shouldn't say obviously, because I would like to do that one day. It's something that they used to do, the Ferris Festival, and then because of the pandemic, they kind of put things on hiatus there, and are restarting that back up. So hopefully one day I'll be able to go out and see that in person. So who knows? Maybe one day. Who knows what will happen in the future? Um, Oh, I guess it's Jemison is the town that Donna's show is in. So don't go to Jameson, go to Jemison. Um, anyway, so that show is opening this weekend. If you're anywhere nearby, check it out. Take pictures because I'd love to see since we're not going to be able to go. They did ask me to do an interview, and William helped me put that together. That's currently on our YouTube channel, and you get a little behind the scenes at Star Cottage Studio, and I talk about my work and my process and practice. So there's that available. All right. Oh, Vicky's watching. Hey, Vicky. Donna says, Andrew, you are so talented. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to turn the camera around and we're going to get going. All right. So you're going to see the ceiling for a second. I'm at my home in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. I was going to go to the cottage, but then Jen's and William are filming. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I can do it from here. All right, you can get a sneak peek. All right, so let me turn on the light. How's that, y'all? And here's my withered arm hand that people thought was my arm. And this is the progress that I've made. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is the Beadwork Museum, which is in Maine, Portland, Maine. They do an annual call for submissions. I actually have a piece in their permanent collection there. They had a beaded square project, and folks could send in their squares, and this was over the pandemic, so I had a little bit of time on my hands. So I made a beaded portrait with like a bead painting with a kind of an embroidery style. And the deadline for their Fishes and Wishes call for entries is June 30th, 2024. They have to be there. And what they do is they have like they have a call for entry, and people can send things in, and then they raffle them off, and it makes money for the museum. I don't know if I'm going to send this one because this one is turning out to be a little bit more work. And so I don't know if I'm going to do that, because also I don't know if I'm going to fit in within the parameters, because as I look over, it says it has to be within 12 inches. And once I add the fins and stuff, it might be over, because let's see, well, maybe after I add the lips and the fins and stuff, I don't know where we're going to be. So I found these taxidermy eyes, these fun kind of plastic eyes at our local creative reuse. They had all these kind of crazy glitter eyes. It's like, I don't even know what creature that would be, but I got them. And then they were super affordably priced. So I added those. And then I did kind of like a peyote stitch around. It's kind of wonkadoodle because it's not necessarily even. the way that I sewed these in. But this is all, most of this is all done with brick stitch, which a lot of my sculptures I do brick stitch for. Um, and I'll show you one of the finished pieces that I made. They just keep getting bigger and bigger. This is a piece that I worked on over the summer with y'all. And so there's a face. And I showed how to make the armature out of tin foil, painter's tape, and some paint. And then on top of that, I beaded. And you can see this is a circular brick stitch. William's watching. He says, "Hello, everyone. Jen and I just finished up filming." Oh, good. And then um, so here you go. This one is actually a little bit easier because this one, I use a lot of smaller beads, so it took a lot longer. But with this, I'm using all size 6s or thereabout, and it's actually going by pretty quick. So every night I take an hour or so and listen to my audiobook, where people kept saying, "Oh, you're not listening to book on tape, but you're not listening to book on tape. Call it audiobook." Okay, all right, audiobook. Um, I have an account, Overdrive, through the library, which I use, and I love that. And then I have an Audible account for the things that I can't get through my local library. So, anyways, this is kind of the world that this lives in. These beaded critters. I don't know if I'm gonna do any kind of like shaped beads like this because they kind of flop around. So I'm kind of imagining maybe some fins off to the side here. And so yeah, and then maybe like a dorsal fin. I don't know. We'll see. I'll definitely in the back. Um, and so there you go. So this is what we've got going on. And then I accidentally crushed this. So it is a little bit wonkadoodle, but that's okay. So I'm going to show you how to get started with making circular brick stitch, and then I can show you how I build on top of this. So some of you may have lots of experience with brick stitch, and you may have even seen some of the tutorials I've already done. For this project, I like to use Fireline. One of the reasons why is because it's a thermally bonded thread, it's plastic, so it's waterproof, which is super handy. Sometimes with like beaded stuff, if you use like a natural fiber, it can dry rot over time, especially on something where there's a lot of tension put on. So I don't want to go and have a problem later on, especially if this ends up in a museum collection or something like that. So, one of the reasons why I actually got into seed beads is because we have or had this store in Ligonier here for several years. And when we started off, one of the things I used to do is do repairs for costume jewelry and vintage jewelry that had, like had issues. And so I had to repair this purse from like I think the 20s, maybe the 20s, and it was a beaded purse, and I had said yes to it, and so I had to teach myself how to bead. And luckily, there was a really amazing artist in town or around the area named Dottie Westerfelt. I don't even know if she's still alive because she was older back then, but who knows, maybe. And she had some health issues. But I learned how to seed bead from her, and and kind of, picked up from different people I knew, because I was friends with Dustin Windikin, and he wrote a book called Getting Started with Seed Beads, and a bunch of them had, you know, in, involved in the publishing industry. I had kind of gotten familiar with different folks, and got their books and learned from a lot of books. This is before YouTube. So I started doing repairs, and I did spiral stitch. Was probably my first stitch that I learned how to do, so I could fix this beaded rope that was the strap of a little cocktail purse, and so that's how I got started in seed beads. So, anyways, because prior to that, I had been mostly known for stringing. But anyways, so using there's a time and a place for all materials, I think. And if you use natural fibers like silk and things like that, you can get a nice drape to the cloth of the drape of the beadwork. If that you can make it very cloth like, because it's basically making a cloth of glass when you make something bead woven. And so yeah. But for this project, I like to use the fire line because it gives it a little bit more structure. And when you have things like these dimples like this, where there's impressions, I could have spent more time to smooth this out and make it really smooth and perfect the surface of it. And that probably would have saved me some trouble. But the fire line is nice because it kind of hides some of that. I didn't want it to completely be textureless because it looks like something else. When it's perfectly smooth, it looks like some of there's a Mexican tradition of adding beads to sculptural work, and that's done using like a paste glue. And with this project, it's all stitched, so there's no glue involved. So I didn't want it to look too perfect because then looks like something that it's not. So I don't mind kind of the undulations on this. It gives it a slight texture to it, which I think is kind of nice. So, anyways, that's why I'm using Fireline, in case you're wondering. I see a couple new people have tuned in. Michelle said, I made a bowl from the last time you taught us this. Donna says, this girl don't seed bead, but I would love to learn. Yeah, it is one of those things that can be time consuming. Hey, Sandra. Um, So it's one of those things that it can be time consuming, and so that's one of the reasons why I didn't do seed beating for a long time, because you can spend hours and hours, on something. I mean, you can spend months or years on something, and you won't necessarily get your money's worth out of your time. So that so I don't seed bead a lot for uh for my production lines, because I just don't have that kind of time yet. Now, eventually, if I get a chance to work with other artists and can collaborate, maybe I'll be able to incorporate more seed beading in my production line work. But for the time being, I just make this kind of stuff for my own amusement, and also for museum stuff. So that's why I can kind of justify spending the time working on something that takes, several weeks, um, as opposed to something that generally speaking, a lot of the stuff I do, it's a day or two, if I'm going to be selling it. Sometimes it takes longer because I do a whole series, but with this, it's all one piece. So that's why I'm hesitant to give this to the museum to raffle off, because then I'm like, what? I may after you spend that much time, then sometimes you want to keep it. So maybe I'll think of a different thing. Anyways, so here we go. This is a fire line. It's a 6 pound. It's smoke. Now, I know some people don't. They prefer to use crystal. Depending on the project that I'm doing, it just depends on the colors of the seed beads and if you can see the thread and if the thread is supposed to be a part of the work, um, visibly a part of the work. The smoke, it kind of disappears. Now, one thing you should know is that it does come off on your fingers. So sometimes it looks like you've been digging in the coal mine, District 12 style. But just washes off with soap and water. I know some people will run their fingers through it to get that excess off. I used to do that, but it doesn't do that too much. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a wingspan of this off. So that's one length of my hand, an arm, and my torso. So I measured it out, one wingspan, and then I'm going to cut this. And I have these little fancy thread cutters. And then I'm going to get my seed beads in a position that I can use. Now, with this thermally bonded thread, I had to smash it down a little bit so that it can actually fit through the needle. If you don't do that, then it won't necessarily fit through the needle, the eye of the needle. So I'm only going to put this through maybe a couple inches, create a tail. I'm not tying this down. Somebody commented on one of my videos and asked why I didn't tie a knot in the end. And one of the reasons why is because it can create some really weird tension issues. Also, with smaller beads, you don't want to crowd out the holes um, with thread. So if you make multiple passes, you want to be able to go through just one time with a thread. All right. Well, I see Brooks watching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up 2 seed beads. And I'm working in a random way, so I don't have a pattern. But you could definitely 100% do a pattern if you wanted to. So I just picked up 2. And I'm going to take these and walk them down to almost the end of my thread. So there's the end. I'm going to give myself maybe a couple inches at the end, and then I'm going to tie a knot. And what's going to happen when you tie that knot, they're going to sit side by side like this. See how that is? They're sitting side by side. And then I'm going to do that surgeon's knot and go through and loop it in and make sure it's nice and secure. And I'm going to do another one just for good measure, even though it's unlikely that this will come apart. All right. So then I take my needle. Oh, that's on the sculpture. And then I'm going to pass this up through one of the holes. And I've got what I've got here. The tail is coming out. If you tug it slightly, it will disappear into the knot will disappear into one of the holes of the beads. All right, so then I'm just going to go through this one. And basically what I'm doing is what's called ladder stitch. And that's how I start the circular brick stitch. So these are sitting side by side. And then I'm going to pick up another seed bead. It doesn't matter what I'm picking up because of this random pattern. And then this is coming out through the top of this seed bead. So I'm going to go up through the bottom of this seed bead. I don't want to go too tight because if it's too tight, it'll be too stiff. And I don't want it to be too stiff, but I also don't want it to be too loose. So whenever you're starting a seed bead project, I say that it's a time of faith because it can oftentimes look like somebody chewed up some bubble gum and spit it out, and it doesn't have that kind of form or structure. But then when you pass through several different times and you keep working on it, then it eventually kind of develops that form that you're trying to find. But until then, it can kind of be all loosey-goosey and look terrible, and then that's just the way. All right, so I'm coming up through the middle of this, through the seed bead in the middle. See how that's going? And I'm going to go down through the bead that I just added. And I just need only 3 beads to start this. All right. So this is basic ladder stitch. And if I wanted to keep going, I could keep going and then I would be making a ladder. Ladder stitch is kind of, I don't know, ladder stitch is kind of loosey-goosey. But you see a lot of times people will use it for like beaded lizards and things like that, keychains and stuff. It's a very easy stitch. So that's one of the reasons why people use it a lot, because it's very easy. All right, so it's coming out the bottom here. And then I'm going to go through this one, the first bead in that segment. And what I'm going to do is I'm gently going to coax. Notice when I hold my beadwork, generally I have my finger over it. And that's not ideal for demonstration because you can't see what I'm actually doing. But when I'm actually working, I hold this flat so that they don't move all around town. And so I've got this loop here. I don't know if you can see that loop. And I'm going to just gently pull this closed, where you've got this little triumvirate right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my thread bridge on the outside of this. All right. So right now, there's a thread bridge here, there's a thread bridge here, but there's no thread bridge here. So the way to do that is I've got my needle, the thread's coming out of this bead at the bottom. So I'm going to take this needle and I'm going to go through the top, and here we go. So this thread bridge has a tendency to slip behind. So you kind of have to coax it to be in the middle of these beads. So it's not all off to one side or off to this side. It's kind of in the middle. Now to lock this in place, I'm going to do a half hitch knot, and I'm going to pick up the thread bridge that I originally created. I'm going to go under the thread bridge. It's going to make a loop right there. I'm going to go through that loop, and that's going to lock it in place so that this little triangular section doesn't move around. I don't want that to move. All right, so I'm holding, you may have noticed I'm holding this tail off to the side with this hand so that it doesn't get in the way. One of the things that you're going to find when you're working on this project is that the little tail will want to get into all the time it wants to get up in the middle of what you're doing. And you're like, go away, little stray, I don't want you. But it's not time for that. It's not time for it to be woven in and hidden and kind of reinforced yet, because you only got 3 beads. So there's not enough. You need to add more beads before you can weave it in. So whenever you're starting a new row, you pick up 2 of the seed beads. So I'm picking up 2 random seed beads. I'm going to go underneath one of the thread bridges. Let me put this like this. All right. So you see this? There's a thread bridge. I'm going to go underneath the thread bridge. And I'm going to pull this down. All right. And so you're going to have these 2. They're going to want to sit next to each other. And then you're going to go up through the last bead that you added. All right. And then the thread is going to come out of the top of this bead. All right. And then the next one, you're just going to pick up 1 bead. And this is where this is kind of, it can be either really frustrating for somebody or it can be very liberating. For a sculpture that you need a lot of kind of like a lot of tolerances, because this is a shape and this is kind of a Wonka doodle shape. You need a little bit of give on what you're doing with your project. If you make it too tight or you make it so rigid and like a you can do like peyote stitch, but if you did that with like delicas and stuff, it would be hard to wrap this shape unless you like figured it out, um so that it would have that kind of so it would have those extra clearances. So just keep that in mind. So when you're at a bead, you're gonna just go around in a circle, adding beads, and this is where it's kind of intuitive. So you kind of have to eyeball it. If your thread bridge is right here, then you put it underneath there. So go underneath the thread bridge, add a bead, and then go up through the bead. And there you go. And then the other thing is that if you have anything around you, just be mindful because you're working with a lot of thread and that stuff can get tangled up real quick and you can have knots. Which these beads are size 6 beads, so they have big holes, so it's not the end of the world. So I'm gonna pick up a bead, go to my next available thread bridge, go underneath that thread bridge, and then up through the bead that I just added. All right. So once you get that stitch, it's pretty easy. So let me just finish this up. I'm going to go underneath the thread bridge. And pick that up like that. See how that tail got caught up in there? So I have to pull that out of the way and pull that kind of tight because this is going to form the center of your circle. Now, there are other ways of starting this. So if you want, you can start with another bead. And I can show that in a second. So I'm just picking up the thread or a bead, go underneath the thread bridge and up through the bead that I just added. And as you can see, this goes by pretty quick. Now, this is where you kind of have to use your intuition and, do what feels right. If this is the room left. The bead is a little bit too large to add that. You may be able to do it. Let's see. Let's try it. I'll add one more bead. And it's different every time because these beads are not Japanese beads. They are Czech beads. So they're all a little bit, there are slight variations in the sizes. And you may not think that that matters, but it does matter because it adds up. So a millimeter here, a millimeter there, then that's half a centimeter, adds up. All right, so I'm gonna finish this row. So how to finish the row is you come up from the last bead, the thread is coming out of the top of the bead, the last bead that we just added, and then we're gonna go down through the first bead that we just added, and then up through the last bead that we just added. And so this does not look like a circle at all. But as you add more rows, it kind of evens out. I like to add that kind of anchor knot just so that it holds the shape in place. If you don't add that, you don't necessarily have to add it. But what's going to happen if you don't add it is they're going to be a little bit looser when you're when you're going to add the next row. So remember, every time you add a new row, you add 2 beads. All right. Then you just go underneath the thread bridge and then you go up through the last bead that you just added. And you want to make sure that they sit side by side because if they don't sit side by side, I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to do something different. But you want them to kind of be side by side so that they all kind of fit together. If you don't, then it's going to create kind of a bulge, I guess, and you won't be able to get the thread up through the bead that you need it to, so that you can continue with your rows. Also, if you don't do that, sometimes what can happen is you can end up showing your thread. Now, on a big sculpture like this, sometimes I consider this big, by the way. I'm used to working on tiny things. But when you're, sometimes you'll see the thread, and I don't mind, because that's kind of like the process of what I'm doing. So generally speaking, with a lot of seed bead stuff, you don't want the thread to be exposed. And the reason why is that usually if the thread is exposed, it's like the weakest point. So you don't want your weakest point on display. You want to have that in a bead. However, with brick stitch, you need that thread exposed, because those thread bridges are how you add beads. So you're going underneath the thread and then up through the bead to lock it in place. So pick up a bead, go under a thread bridge, pull that nice and tight so that it comes close to it, and then go up through the bead that you just had. Now there's a couple things that can happen where some things can happen where you may not be doing it the right way. And one of the things that happens is if you don't go up through underneath that thread bridge, or if you have it go at the wrong angle, what can happen is that the bead will just pop off. So sometimes if you add a bead and it's not, and it doesn't add, it might be because your thread bridge isn't secure. So you just go underneath your thread bridge, and you want it to be nestled up nice and close to the one previous, and then you go up through the bead. Now notice, if you go up through the other side, what happens is then you can see the thread, and you don't want that to happen. You want the thread to be inside of the bead. And then, okay, so here's where, if you go and you just use your needle and you don't actually go, sometimes you go underneath that thread bridge, but you can also go too far, and then you just pop the bead out because you go back through that thread bridge. So don't do that. Make sure that your thread is still underneath that thread bridge right there. See that thread bridge? I'm going underneath that, and then I'm going to go up through the bead, and hopefully not out through the other side of the thread bridge. All right, I'm going to pull it. And this goes pretty quick once you kind of get into a rhythm. Again, take breaks as you're working. If you have any stiffness in your neck, or you start losing feeling in your legs, get up, do some stretches. If your eyes are kind of myopically focusing, try to focus on a point and the furthest point in the room. Sometimes I would have written words, and I would try to read those written words. And what that does is it helps exercise your eyes, so you're not all just working at that one level. Your eyes will work, you go back and forth. All right, so I've reached the end of this row, and I'm going to go down through the first bead in that row, and then up through the last bead in that row. Brooke says, I like that seed bead color. Thanks. This is mostly smoky amethyst. And then there's a couple other purpley kind of amethysty colors put in, and all AB. I try to put all AB. All right. So that finishes off the row. Again, it doesn't necessarily look like a perfect circle right now, but the more you add to it, the more it becomes circular. because we started off with this kind of weird triangular shape of those 3 beads, it's not necessarily going to want to make a rounded shape right off the back. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to show you another way to start. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a bead that's round and has a relatively large opening for the hole. I don't want anything like a pearl that, unless the pearl has a great big hole, because let's see. We'll use this one. All right. And the reason why I don't want to use a pearl is because sometimes the holes on pearls are small. So you want to have one that has enough room for the needle to pass through and for several strands of thread to exist in that space. All right, so this is a different circle that I'm showing you how to do. And I'm going to cut off some thread, a wingspan. And then I'm going to get this needle and thread my needle. And again, you kind of have to flatten down the end of this fire line so that fits through the needle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk this bead up through almost down to the bottom of the thread. I'm going to give myself enough so that I can work that through the beads. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tie this in a knot. And then I'm going to do another knot. And it's going to be surgeon's knot. And then I always like to do one more for good luck. All right. So this bead, normally you don't want the thread showing, but for this project you do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this knot. So I'm going to take this needle, I'm going to go up through that bead again, and I'm going to gently pull until that knot gets pulled up into the hole. And then that hides it. See how that worked? Now notice I did not use my He-Man strength to pull this and make this super tight. Because if you pull this super, super duper tight, then what's going to happen is you won't be able to get your needle under it. And you can end up splitting your thread and creating weak spots in your jewelry work. And then you almost finish the project and then the middle falls out. So you don't want to do that. So next thing you do is the threads coming out of the top of this. I'm going to take my needle and go up through the bottom. And this is kind of a tight fit, y'all. I'm not going to lie. The needle was having a little bit, had to do, I don't know, grease it up or something. All right. So there's a thread bridge on the outside this side and the thread bridge on this side. And then the first loop that I did is on this side. I'm going to go underneath that. I'm going to do one of those little half hitch knots or anchor knots so that this other side doesn't move. All right. So what this does is you've created a thread bridge that goes all the way around this round bead. So remember, whenever we're starting a new row, we pick up 2 seed beads. And you don't have to use size 6 for this. You can use any size you want. And the nice thing about brick stitch is that it's relatively forgiving. So like I said, if it's too tight, it's going to be a pain in the behind. Now, the other thing that's cool about brick stitch is if you can't get it from the back, usually you get it through the back. You can also do it from the front. You just have to turn your work around and then so you're not accidentally not going through the bead. And then you just pull that tight. All right. So remember, whenever you start a row, pick up 2 seed beads and then go from there. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a seed bead. I'm going to go underneath this thread bridge, which is just easier this after you add those first few beads, because it creates kind of like when you're weaving, it creates a little gap, that thread and the bead where the thread and the bead meet. It's kind of pulled up because of these beads that are added, so it's a little bit easier to get in there. So I'm just going to finish this all the way around. I'm going to go up through underneath that thread bridge and then up through the bead, and then I'm just going to go all the way around. And that's how you kind of start with a bead in the middle. So I showed you the first technique is how to start circular brick stitch without a center bead. This shows you circular brick stitch to start in around a bead, around a round bead. Now again, this thread bridge is a new one, so I'm going to have to work my way underneath this thread, making sure I don't accidentally go through the thread. Sometimes it helps to go through the other side. If that's the case, then just turn it around, and then that way you aren't accidentally going, popping that bead off. But once it's locked in place, like so, then you can go back to normal. I like to work in one direction, but if it's not working in the one direction, then I just turn my work over and work from that side and then flip it back when it will work. All right. So does anybody have any questions about that? I mean, it's pretty easy. I'm not going to lie. And it's one of those ones where it has a lot of give in it. So if you are working on a shaped, in my case, critter, then it will compensate for anything that's kind of like wonkadoodle. You know how sometimes in your old house, the walls aren't always even? That's like this. Like if you're going to do like geometric beadwork, you can't really, I mean, I guess you can work on a wonkadoodle base, but it makes it much trickier. All right, I'm finishing up that row. So I just went down through the first bead, and then I'm going to go up through that last bead that I just added. And then I'm going to do a little half hitch knot. And there you go. That completes the first row of this brick stitch on a round bead. See that? Of course, I got cat hair and everything else in there. I kind of like this just the way it is. And this is a nice way. I mean, maybe I would add another row, maybe 2 rows of beads, and then use that as an earring component. You can use this as a bracelet. Whatever you want, you can stitch these together, and now you have a little unit of beadwork. Now, one thing I will say is that there are great big thread bridges, which is good for our purposes with circular brick stitch. But if you're making this into like a finished piece of jewelry, then those thread bridges may not be the most secure. So what I would recommend is go down a size in seed beads. So right now I'm working with size 6.0 seed beads. I would go down to an 8.0 or 11.0, 10.0. If you want to be real fancy, you could do 15s. And that will just, they're smaller. So, when you have a round shape, so if this is round like this, if you have a big shape, you're going to have more gaps. So if you have a round shape and you have smaller units, same shape, but if you have smaller units, the thread bridges will be smaller and less kind of hanging out. So that's just what you got to realize when you're planning your project. All right. So if you wanted to do brick stitch and you didn't want to do it in the round, because sometimes when you're working in the round, it can be hard or not what you want. Sometimes you want a flat piece. On the base of this sculpture, I did all of this as kind of like a rectangular situation here. And look, you can switch up your beads too. You don't have to have all of the same beads. Some stitches require you to have all of the same size, all of the same this, all of the same that. Otherwise, it looks really terrible. This, you can mix and match to your heart's content, and you don't necessarily need all the same size. It does create a different look. So this is all different kinds of shapes and sizes. And then this is all size 6. Now, these ones are check glass, so they're all a little bit different. But you can see the difference in the texture that you can create using the same exact stitch. So if you wanted to do on an on a frame, for example, all you would do is just tie it on as you would to this, as you would a bead like that. But I'll show you to do simple. We're just going to do a simple straight stitch. All right, we're going to start the same way that we did before when I was showing you how to start the bricks, the circular brick stitch. You just go and you tie it and you make a little knot. And you can go pretty quick. I mean, this is one of those stitches that flies by once you get going. And then I'm going to pass this through one of the beads. It doesn't matter which. And then I'm just going to add on beads in to make a ladder stitch. Now it's going to grow on the sideways. So sometimes you don't want that to happen, in which case you would do peyote stitch, where you're growing kind of vertically as opposed to sideways. And that may not make sense right away, but yeah. So anyway, so I'm doing some ladder stitch. I'm not going to do too much because this isn't actually for anything. And I don't want to like spend all day and night showing you something that I'm going to not do. So I just made a ladder stitch of these 5 beads. And I'm going to pick up 2 seed beads because remember, whenever we're adding a new row, you will use 2 seed beads. Now, there is an exception, and that's if you're doing a pattern, like if you're doing a bead crumbs pattern, where they're trying to make like a face or something. Sometimes you don't want your row to grow. Sometimes you want it to kind of be short, so you'll add only 1 bead, but you will see the thread that way. So just keep that in mind. You'll see the thread off to the side. So I'm going underneath the thread bridge, and then I'm going to go up through the beads that I just added, the last bead in that segment, and then I want to pull that together. Again, this is one of those things where it's going to require a lot of faith for you to kind of, this is not going to look great right away. It kind of looks loosey-goosey and a mess. But the more you add, I'm going to add it, pick up a bead, go underneath a thread bridge, and then up through this bead. And the more you do it, the more it will kind of resolve itself. So pick up a bead, go underneath the thread bridge, and then up through the bead that you just added. And then you just have to be careful you're not tying knots, because you can tie knots in your work and that's creating a loop, and then you go through that loop. So you just have to be mindful of that. And right now, this looks like a mess. Look how janky that looks. That looks like nothing. But the more you do, the more it comes together. All right. So I'm going to do one more bead, maybe. I think I'll do one more bead. Now, this is also a rocal. Now, we talked the other day about the difference between a delica and a rocal. Delicas are like a tube. It's a cylindrical shaped seed bead. These are kind of rounded on the side. So because they're rounded on the side, they don't necessarily want to fit snugly together. A delica will want to fit snugly together because it's flat on flat. And this is like round on round. You know, you can't have too much round on round because it's not going to want to fit together. However, you can kind of force it to work. It's not the easiest, but it does work. So I flip my work over because I'm starting over. The next row, I'm picking up 2 seed beads. I'm going underneath the thread bridge and then up through the last bead that I just added. And so this, like I said, this goes pretty quick once you get it going. And the more you do stitching, the more it kind of resolves itself and takes its form. So the first couple rows looks like hot garbage, but the more that you add, the more it shapes up because that tension kind of pulls it. You know, it's not being pulled in just one direction, it's being pulled in both directions. So it evens out a little bit. All right. So I'm going to go underneath the thread bridge and, you know, depending on the pattern, you can alternate whatever and then keep adding. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to add one more. 4, 6. And see how it's resolving itself. See how it's resolving itself. Flip it over. And then if I keep going, it's going to get even more kind of straightened out and it's going to look uh, more correct. Now, one thing that I'm going to tell you is that by doing this, you're also creating a you're creating an opportunity on the side. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And what that means is you just kind of have to look at your beadwork and then it starts resembling other stitches. And what I mean by that is that with peyote stitch, what you're doing is you're creating kind of like this bead up and a bead down and then you kind of fill in the gap. And that's how you do peyote stitch. That's probably the most terrible description of peyote stitch ever. But once you're familiar with that stitch, then you kind of like that's how it works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So what I mean by that is as you're developing this, there is going to be kind of an up and then a down. And so what I mean by that is there's going to be an up, there's going to be a down, there's going to be an up, there's going to be a down. And that, if you wanted to do peyote stitch off of this, you could do that. So this is where when you are working in a sculptural form like this, sometimes you have to sew pieces into that, into your work. And you have to find the place that it fits, and then you sew it in to this. All right. So that's how you would do that. I'm not going to do that with this because I want to keep this mostly the way that I have it. But this does, if you do need to do peyote stitch with this, you can do peyote stitch with this beads off to the side. Now, maybe I'll add another row. I'll add another row and then I'll show you what I mean. Because I don't know, is that clear? Because in my mind that makes sense, but I've also done this a couple times. So I know, in my mind that makes sense. But does that make sense to y'all? That you can do peyote stitch even though you're doing brick stitch. They're very closely related. They just grow in different directions. So with peyote stitch, it grows in a different way. So this requires the thread bridge. With peyote stitch, you don't really mess with the thread bridges. Marion says it does make sense. Oh, good. All right, I'm gonna do one. I'm almost finished with this row, but see how this kind of grows pretty quickly. Now the cool thing about this, and I'm gonna experiment with this some more, is that I'm going to do some pieces with enamel, and then I'm going to do beadwork on top of the enamel, and then fuse the beadwork to the surface of the enamel. So I don't know when I'm going to have time to do that, but maybe. All right. So I've got this little tongue, and you've got the down, you got the up, you got the down, you got the up, you got the down. So for peyote stitch, it grows this way. Brick stitch grows this way. So if you wanted to add this way, and using peyote stitch, you'd pick up a bead, you'd go through the up, and then you pick up a bead, and you go through the up, and then since you're going to be on since there's no up to go through, you go through the down at the end of the row, and you pick up an up, or you pick up a bead, and that becomes an up. All right, so that's kind of like a step up, what they call a step up. And then, so you've got this, and so then you've always got, this is what's called an odd count peyote. Even count peyote is way easier, because you don't have to do that weird kind of add a bead to create that rest of it. All right, so that's how you can do peyote on the edge if you wanted to. So that's a way that you can embellish your edges if you want to embellish your edges. If you want to have like this kind of like defined high low, you can do that. And if not, then here you go. I like even count peyote stitch way better, because then I don't have to think about it. It's more automatic. So if I wanted to do that, I would just add another row of brick stitch, and then it becomes easier. All right. So that's just multiple ways of doing the same thing. Not the same thing, but similar things. Now, some of those ones, you're going to end up, it may work the first little bit of it, but then you end up having problems later on. And so, you just I kind of feel like when you get to that, you kind of have to just experiment a little bit, and then the beads kind of show you how they lock together. Now that's probably not the best way of teaching that, because it sounds very there's no like step one, step two. It's kind of like, well, you kind of have to just look at it and then figure it out. And that's not always necessarily easy to teach. So there you go. All right, I'm going to quit that because we're not going to actually use that. And then I'm going to show you a little bit me adding on to the sculpture. All right, so right now I've got this kind of situation going on. And one of the reasons why you may be wondering why I have this like purple eggplant shape and I painted it this kind of iridescent purple. And what it happens is if there's gaps in the beadwork, you'll see a little bit of that and it helps reflect off of that. So when you have like silver line, it just makes it more glowy. And this kind of looks like that fancy corn. They call that jewel corn. All right. So I've got this situation here where the thread's already embedded and I'm basically starting a new row. So what do? When I start a new row, I pick up 2 beads. I find the thread bridge. I know that it's going to take up approximately that much room. So I'm not going to go the thread bridge here. I'm going to go the thread bridge here so that I have enough room to accommodate these shapes. And then I'm going to tug it into place. And what that means is I haven't secured this yet, but I can kind of move it around. One thing you should know is that there's not a thread bridge connecting this work. Marion says, if your eggplant looks like that, don't buy it. Or do. You may get superpowers. All right. So there's no thread bridge connecting this new beadwork, this new row to the previous work. So that's something that I have to think about. And that can be sometimes good because sometimes when you're doing like with like a pleat, you want to be able to pull those beads in. So I'm not going to worry about this for right now. I'm just going to let that hang out. And then I'm going to go up through that last bead that I just added. And that's going to kind of lock into place. And then all it is just sewing this on. It's almost like darning a sock. So you go underneath that thread bridge. And now here's the other thing. It's sometimes good to have a set of pliers. And then you can kind of gently bend the needle so that it doesn't get stuck. So you go up through the beads that you just added. Now, sometimes your needle will be in a position where you can't easily access it from the back. So sometimes you have to go through the front. And this is something that you can't turn over. So you just have to be careful about not pulling that bead off that you just added. I don't know if that makes sense or not. Now, this is one of those kind of frustrating things that happens because this will want to get caught up on the top there. And I just pulled and undid my needle. And that's mostly because of the angle that I'm holding this at. Um, if I wasn't under a camera that's like a few inches above it, that would have been fine. But that's not the end of the world. You just have to restring or rethread your needle. And you pick up that bead, you go underneath the thread bridge, and up through the bead that you just added. All right. So this is what I do. I'll listen to my audiobook and I will do this. And for me, it's very relaxing. It's one of those things that's almost meditative. On camera, it doesn't look like that because I am working in a weird way that's not like the way my body normally moves. I think it's important to, listen to your body. If you have any weird pains from being hunched over or whatever, then you kind of have to get up and stretch or change your position, add a pillow. If you need magnification, this is also another thing. Use what you need to do so that you can keep doing what you need to do. Now, the thing with this is that it's going to want, if I keep adding and I don't do anything to it, it's going to want to kind of sit at an angle. And there's going to be space underneath your beadwork that doesn't conform to the shape of your beadwork. So once you get to a certain point, then what I do is I anchor that beadwork back into the sculpture. So for instance, let me show. See how this is coming up? If I keep coming up, it's going to be them flappy tail. It's not going to be ideal. It's going to have this, and it's not going to be stuck down. So every once in a while, what I'm going to do is once it gets out to a certain point, then I'm going to go and run a thread going in and out through the edge of the beadwork, and then I'm going to just tuck it down through the tape. And this does make your needle kind of gummy. So a little trick that I keep is that I have a little napkin with a little bit of Goo Gone, which is like an orange citrus kind of solvent, and just wipe the needle after you go through that tape, because it will make your tape or your needle gummy with the glue. So every once in a while, I'll tack it down every so often. And that way, this is not just like a sheath that exists on top of it. It gets incorporated in the surface. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be, because I'm covering the whole entire shape. If I was only going to bead on part of it, I would want to be more mindful of tacking down the edges more frequently. And then that way it won't get like pulled up or caught on something. But because this will eventually be entirely covered, it's going to be pulled in all the different directions. William's here.
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing?
I was telling him about how I was stressed out today.
Oh, I know.
No, so
Bad news bear.
I know. So not ideal.
No. How's everybody else doing?
Sounds good. Sounds like Harry's got some good homemade pizza.
Ooh. So Donna's getting ready for some craft fairs, I think.
Yeah.
Nice.
How are you?
I'm okay. I got some big orders packed. Well, semi-packed up. Barb's going to complete packing tomorrow.
Because she's back on her schedule.
Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. And I just have a few things to deliver to her in the morning, and then some really big orders are going to get out.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we got those going, and she got through most of all the kit stuff, which was great, and shipped it out, even stuff that came in yesterday.
Oh, good.
So, but it's probably the cutoff for the kits, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Jen filmed a tutorial. She's got some really cool things this week.
What is it?
I'm not going to say now.
Is it earring, bracelet, necklace, pendant?
I only saw a quick bit of it because I didn't actually see the finished piece because she's changed it up a little bit, she said in the thing. But it's going to be their earrings, but I think you could also, from what I'm seeing, use it as a pendant.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that's good.
She's going to send me a picture of everything because she couldn't give me a picture earlier because it's not quite the same.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. So I was just showing them some Brook Stitch.
Nice.
I showed them Brook Stitch.
Who's gonna go make this now?
I don't know.
Who's gonna make a fish too?
Maybe not this, because this is taking a while. For some reason, it is going quicker than this, and the reason why it's going quicker is because I use smaller beads. So this I worked on for a couple months.
A long time on that one.
But not like continuously.
No.
So don't get too discouraged if you're like a couple months. So this is I only bead a couple hours a night. But I don't know if I'm gonna send this one. I may make a hoopty fish.
A hoopty fish.
Yeah, because this is a lot of work. I want to keep it. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll be famous, and then they'll want to show it.
Okay, here's a preview of what Jen made, real quick, for all of you out there.
Ooh, that looks fancy.
Yeah, so that's just a quick. That's all you get, everybody.
Teaser.
Quick teaser.
There's only 12 people watching, so it's
Oh,
not going to be like
seed beating project. Sometimes you don't get the
views.
views.
You know, that's a thing also. And maybe they don't like my teaching style when it comes to seed beating, because I'm like, I don't know. I'm not very I don't know. I guess I am.
I mean, you're doing things that a lot of other seed beating people don't do. So I think seeing what you do and how you do it is worth it.
I mean, this is what I do. So
I mean, there's a lot of seed beaters that do not make fish.
correct.
So if you want to learn how to make a fish with all this, with the stitches and things that you learn, I think this is a good place to view it.
But even if you don't make a fish.
No, but that's what I mean. Any creature, like different out of the box things. A lot of, I think, seed beating teachers teach you patterns, and then you make certain things with them. But you get an extra bit of imagination here.
Well, this is how you I showed the basics, and then you take those basics and then you use them.
Expand on them.
And so that's kind of why, I don't know, it's also something that you're not going to finish in one sitting. So that's the other thing, is that sometimes I feel like people like to see, you know, they want it to be done.
Any CP project in one sitting. I'm not proficient enough, but this is something that you work on for quite a while.
I mean, if you're just making like a shape like this, you could do that. Yeah. And make a bunch of earrings or components for bracelets, sew it together. Or if you have a big enough hole, this is not going to be big enough, but if you had a big enough hole through your bead, you could string this up on like soft flex and string a whole bunch of them together. And then you have a, you know, bracelet. As I throw it on the ground. So there's that. That's how you do this. It's not anything like, I think sometimes it looks really impressive when it's done, but it also kind of looks janky when it's not complete. Yeah, but you're also showing something that is relatively, like you said, some kind of simple stitches that end up being really, really, like, how did you do that kind of project? Yeah, and it's just one stitch. Now, some of the areas you kind of have to figure it out, because you can't really do circular brick stitch in a crevice. It's like, so you kind of have to fill in those holes when you get to them, and how they meet. And so that is kind of the trickiest part, I think, about this, is how do you get the beads to meet? For instance, I just finished this row, and as you can see, there's a row going like this, and there's a row going like this. So how do you bridge that gap? Well, the first thing I can try is to add a bead and go into this thread bridge. Lena says, my mind just struggles with it, especially if I stop and come back. I can never finish that project Kelly was teaching us. So this eye is kind of like the way that Kelly showed how to do this peyote stitch on the top, but I showed a project on how to capture and create a bezel using seed beads. And so I did that. And then I did peyote stitch on the top to kind of act as a bezel to shape it in. Michelle says, instead of the typical bracelet for brick stitch, you teach us out of the box ideas. Thanks. Well, it's kind of like, it depends on what you want to do with it. So I mean, not everybody wants to just make bracelets, or not everybody just wants to make jewelry, or if we want to make these big shapes. So, like I said, it depends on what you want to do, but I'm going to try out adding it here and see if it works. Um, and it kind of works, but there is kind of a gap there. So what I might do is I'll go back through and I'll tighten up some of these, this row after with some thread. So that's a neat how when the light hits it, it almost looks like a rainbow.
Mm-hmm. Those are really pretty beads.
And these were mostly all purple beads, but they kind of look brown. But anyways, um, one of the things Lennis mentioned was about picking up where you left off. And in a project like this, it's actually easier because you automatically know what you have to do. And what I mean by that is if it's blank, you got to fill it up.
Right.
And so there's only a couple ways that you can do that. So you can keep adding these circles, and what you do is you kind of find a slot where they fit, and then you can add it. So naturally, if I add this little circle in there and just sew that in there right now, that works really well for right here. However, here it's called Nightmare Station.
It's kidding, yeah.
So what I would just do is make this a little bit, maybe add 2 rows on the outside of this circular piece, and then when it fits in like a puzzle piece into this shape, then you just sew. You go in and out through the new part and into the old part, and then you just sew in the section that fits. It's like a puzzle piece. So that's how you add new sections to this. So there's 2 ways to grow this. You can either grow it by making these pieces and sticking them together, or you can do like what I'm doing with this, what I showed you, and just adding this row and like growing this row by row. Or you can make the little pieces and then you can see how this came together. So there's a piece here, there's a circular piece here, there's a circular piece here, there's a circular piece here. So all of these little pieces kind of came together. And then you can see where I kind of had to stitch them in so that they all kind of fit. So there you go. That's how you do it. So if you end up where you don't know and you're like, how do I go from here? You just kind of, with this, you're covering the whole entire thing. So you just look and find the blank spots and then fit in. Now, one of the things I mentioned before is sometimes when you add a new row, it creates kind of a loose part. So whenever I work my thread back over to this end, I'm going to want to cinch that back together. So I would take this, the needle would come out through go from the bottom to the top of that bead, pull that out, go into the next bead over, come down through the top, go through the bottom, and then go back over to this bead, and then go back through the bottom to the top, and then pull it tight, and then add an anchor or half hitch knot, and that will close that gap a little bit. Now you do, if it's if you do that, you sometimes can have a bead that sticks up, and in which case you can try to press it down and make it level. It's kind of like when you're gathering fabric, you'll get a pleat. So you can either try to force that back down, or um, you can just leave it and kind of just gently massage it as you're working, and it will kind of take that shape. All right. Facebook user says, are you gluing the new sections on the form? And if not, how are they staying attached to the form? No, I'm not. There's no glue in this at all. So the first circle I made a brick stitch circle, and I added it into an area, and then along the edge, I kind of stitched it into the armature. And the armature, I've shown how to do this, is aluminum foil with masking tape or painter's tape and some paint. So this, you can sew into this. It's not the easiest to sew into, so sometimes you need like pliers to push it through, and that's what, and then pull it out, and then your needle, because there's tape, it has that sticky. It can make your needle sticky, so you just wipe off your needle every once in a while. I usually keep a little napkin with a little bit of Goo Gone on it, or orange oil, sweet orange oil, because it has a natural kind of paint stripper action. I don't know if that's right. Solvent action, and it takes the sticky right off. It does, if you're not careful, it can dry your fingers out. So,
Acids.
huh?
Those acids
I don't know what it is. Citric acid,
probably dissolving
the bonds of the sticky. Y'all didn't know we are gonna do science up in here, but so that's how you do that. Um, so yeah, so
like you said before, if you do glue, the glue will come up through the beads sometimes.
yeah, the first one I did of like this, I made a skull, and I glued the sections in, and it squeezed up through the middle, or the kind of negative spaces, and it looked kind of yuck. Also, finding the right kind of glue was kind of a challenge. If you're doing kind of a mosaic piece, you could definitely do that. Um, Betsy Youngquist, if you're familiar with her work, she glues all her pieces and they look amazing. And there's a bunch of people who do that kind of micro mosaic work, and it just depends who it is. Some people will use epoxy sculpt, and use that to embed their beadwork. I did a project because I really like bead crumbs, but the thing is like then you end up with a bunch of little giblets, and then you're like, what are you gonna do this? I also don't like to sell stuff from a pattern from another artist. That's just something that I kind of just don't like to do. But so I end up with all these little giblets of these little cute little critters and things, and I'm like, what am I gonna do with this? So we were teaching a project on how to use epoxy sculpt. I get asked to teach that class quite frequently. And so what I did is I took the finished beadwork and I embedded it into the epoxy clay. So that it's a chemical reaction that hardens the clay. And that's one way that you can do it. Now, there's other artists, they use different adhesives. One bead artist that I know glues stuff in, they use it's a gold bottle with purple letters. It's tacky something. Maybe somebody out there knows what I'm talking about, but it's tacky glue. It's a gold bottle, purple font. The glue is white, but it dries clear. And sometimes people glue stuff in that way. I don't know. It just depends. I don't traditionally use a lot of like super glue or things like that because it can kind of uh, the beads can create kind of like a static electric charge around them, especially crystals. And so it has this field around it. And that sounds weird, but it's kind of got this like static field around it. And the glue, when you have that like super glue, it turns into like a vapor. You can't really see it, but that static field attracts that vapor glue, and then it makes like this scummy surface, and it's like your crystal looks crusty because it's got that static charge. I could have just made all of that up, but the thing is that it does make your using super glue and crystal. the beads get crusty. So I don't know if that's the real, that's the true of why they get crusty, but that's in my mind, that's what happens. So Marion says Eileen's tacky glue. Eileen. Lena says someone told me some glues are acidic and can damage your thread. I don't know. That's also true. It can eat away the thread that you're using depending on what you're using. So, like some glues, to get it so it doesn't get crusted up in the tube or the container, they add a little bit of microsolvent to keep it kind of like loosey and juicy and be able to squeeze out. And once it dries, it kind of goes away. But sometimes the solvents can eat away different types of plastic. So I believe that. Aileen, she says, not Eileen. So if you want to glue that way, you can kind of glue that way. But like I said, I don't glue. So um that's up to you and your preference. So if you wanted to, there's a bunch of toy makers who have all different kinds. I don't know what their names are on Instagram, but if you look up plushy toy makers, sometimes they show you how they make their patterns. And one of the ways that they make their patterns is they'll take like a form, which is usually like um, crumbled up aluminum foil, and then put tape over that, and then they'll cut the tape and create patterns from that. And then when they stitch it up, then wherever you have a cut, you have to stitch up and it will fit on that form, and then you can stuff it. I'm not a toy maker like that, so I don't work like that, but I just leave the armature inside. It does add weight, so if you wanted this to be like completely like super soft, maybe you would do that. But I don't know. I kind of feel like you would be able to smash it. So, there's a lot of different ways of doing the same thing. So it just depends on how you want to do it. In my mind, I was never trained how to do this. I was taught how to do brick stitch, and then I use those fundamentals to do what I'm doing now. So that's how I developed this. But if there's a lot of different ways you can do this. I know some people, they bead in a way that they don't need an armature. Um, and there's an artist named Joyce J. Scott, and I don't know if she uses an armature for her pieces, but some of her figurative work that she does, I don't think she has an armature. So she kind of beads it, and then the thread and the beads hold the shape. Um, and I don't know if she takes them out after, like an armature, and then takes the armature out. I don't know because I've never taken a class with her, but she's probably one of the most famous figurative seed beaters. She's having a big thing up in Baltimore, I think now, coming up soon. And it's a big kind of exhibition of her beaded work. So that may be worth a field trip. So, anyways, there you go. If you have any questions about this, let me know. And hopefully I can answer those questions. Um, and if you want to try this out, experiment with it, I would say start off with a small piece and then see how you like it. And then, it's not terribly hard, and the materials cost, if you're working on a small piece, maybe $5. I mean, if you have, how much is a tube of seed beads?
If you got it from us last week, it was $1.80.
$1.80 to $10, depending on how fancy.
Yeah. I don't think we had any at $10.
There was like one,
Was there?
but I was on discount, so it was like
Still seven,
7.42.
yeah.
But so it depends how many beads you're going to do. This is a larger piece for sure, so it's going to cost more. But for if you want a project that you don't really need a lot of tools, that's another reason why I kind of got into seed beading. Is that before I did a lot of like wire work and like stringing, kind of like low tech metal smithing stuff, and I do much more high tech. I don't know if high tech is the right word, but I do more advanced metal smithing now. And if I want to go and take that on the road, I got to pack a lot. You got your saw blades, lube, hammers, bench block, this, that, cutters, this, that, over there, go, good, gosh, the metal itself. Um, with this, you can fit, get a Tupperware and put some beads in it and some needle. And if you're flying, you can take some nail clippers because they're not going to take that. They may take this business because they're going to be like, who are you going to shiv with that? It's like, nobody. This hardly cuts the thread, let alone person. Um, so you can make a little travel kit, and just as long as you have the fire line and it fits in your little travel kit, you can give yourself hours and hours of work while you're on vacation. But seriously, when I would travel, like I would go on these long flights. Like I used to do a show in Hawaii several times a year, and the flight is long. And sometimes, sometimes they have movies, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have to pay for that. So I would just make a little travel kit of a little Tupperware with some beads and some thread and a needle and the little nail clippers and the whole, I could have a little travel studio in the size of, some leftovers. So that's a good way to, it's a portable solution. With some of the other stuff I do, there's a lot of stuff that you have to carry. So there's, if you use certain types of paint, then you have to bring the solvent to clean the brushes and all kinds of stuff. So just keep that in mind. It is something that I like to do on the road because I can carry it with me relatively easy. It doesn't take up a huge amount of space. And as you see, it's kind of meditative. So if like when I was doing shows and stuff more, I could take a project like this and work on it in the hotel room and put some TV on in the background or audiobook and work on it that way. Marianne says work on vacation. I joke on that because we've never actually taken a vacation, believe it or not. We've always had something business related to do. We've never just like gone on a trip to go on a trip.
Yeah, to not do business, to sit on the beach or
No, and I'm okay with that because, like, for instance, like if you go see a creative person, like another fellow maker, and you talk about the things you're making, technically that's work. So, um, or like usually we'll put it into like if we're gonna go somewhere, we'll like stop and see one of our suppliers or one of our vendors and pick up stuff, and then we can, write the trip off. Marion says try it sometime. I don't know if we're there yet. Maybe after this new way
the new way.
with us having more free and easy time, maybe we'll do that. There are a bunch of covered bridges around here, and I was like, oh, maybe we'll go and like see all the covered bridges and be like the people that buy antiques on the weekends. um, but then of course we went on a walk like the first day of us like having our different schedule, and I'm over here picking stuff off the ground to make into jewelry. So um, that's called compulsion. So there's that. um Lena says we've had one vacation ever Everything else was work or family obligations. Marion says, start with a day trip. I guess. I mean, I like what I do. So that's the thing is like going to see an artist talk means more to me than just like just just sitting there doing nothing. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but like wouldn't it be more fun to go and like find something interesting and unique or learn something? I don't know. I love to learn. So, my ideal vacations include classes. So, because then not only do I feel, even if it's something that I don't do regularly, I feel like I have more knowledge in my brain, which is probably why I'm in the situation that I am now. So, anyways, Cindy's joined us and we are just about ready to be done. So, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today and for all of your support. We really appreciate it. Since the physical store has been closed, it's it's kind of tricksy. I mean, in one way, it's kind of we have less expenses because we don't have to pay the big rent every month for the shop. But on the other hand, we don't have the income that was coming in through the shop, even if it was slower lately. It was something, so that something's not there anymore. So it is a little bit harder of a time, but it kind of balances out. I did get, like I said, if you watch the beginning of this video, the nightmare time of a student loan that will not die, and just keeps coming back like a zombie nightmare zombie student
A lot
loan.
of people are giving you some advice, helpful advice. We'll have to look into some of those options.
Watch Fight Club. That's not what I'm talking about. You remember what happens at the end of that?
No.
So if you have not read that book by Chuck Palahniuk, Palahniuk, I don't know that dude. He wrote that one book about the swallow or whatever. But they made a movie, Ed Norton and Brad Pitt and Helena Bonham Carter, however you say her name. I think she's in that. Anyways, so then I don't want to ruin it.
I was gonna say. I mean,
Anyways,
it has been out for a while, but
I mean more than 20 years. But anyways, the end they do something and they take care of problems real quick for a lot of people. I don't want to ruin it. But if you're interested in finding out what that entails, which I don't want to say that I'm actively thinking of that because it's a bad thing in so many ways, but the thought did cross my mind. Anyways, before I get in trouble for being Unabomber style. All right, bye everybody.
Bye.
See ya.